tell you this. I think it's been too long since we've had a new Lena Dunham show on TV. It's been 8 years since Girls went off the air, but Lena's back. And the new show is called Too Much. And just like Girls, Too Much draws heavily on Lena Dunham's real life. But instead of New York, this time we are in London. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Hanna Flint is here. Kathryn van Arendonk is here. Hello to both of you. How's it going?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, Sunny.
That's what I delight to have both of you here. Kathryn, I hear the streets are calling it the Lenaissance. Is that true? I don't think they're calling it that. That's not
I don't know. Let's not go that far this early.
Okay.
Which streets?
That's reasonable. That is a fair contest. Okay, I just want to set the stage here for a moment. So what we have here is Jess. She's played by Megan Stalter. She's trying to heal a broken heart because she just got dumped, and then she's like, you know what? What I'm going to do is I'm going to move from New York to London, and she is working in film production, and then she gets to London, and predictably it does not go as she thinks it will. Let's just hear a little bit of the show.
I wanted to be in bed with like Hugh Grant from the British Jones Diaries.
Did you say British Jones?
Yeah, there's 4 of them.
Yeah, it's not called British Jones.
She's British!
Hanna, you were already shaking your head before I even asked you any questions, which I love that for us. How much of the story is based on Lena Dunham's real life?
I mean, I think quite a lot. You know, this is co-created by her husband now, Lewis Velbert, a British musician who she met when she moved to London after escaping a bad breakup. And I feel that the ex and his new girlfriend are very Jack Antonoff and Margaret Qualley coded. So yeah, I think this might be semi-autobiographical, but you know, with some real heightened, like noughties sort of rom-com antics.
Yeah, the Jack Antonoff sort of parallels just pop out in the cardigan of the first time that you see her actually go like, I don't know if he's supposed to be a direct Jack Antonoff person here, but that cardigan, I feel like I've seen Jack Antonoff wear that specific cardigan. That's literally the first time that you see him in the show. Kathryn, for those of us who sort of maybe understand that like Lena kind of deals in the partly autobiographical, I think we also need to take a moment to like maybe reckon with the fact that Lena Dunham has had a long shadow. Like she's cast like a long shadow over this moment, I think. Talk to me about the context that we're dealing with of Lena as a cultural figure with this new show.
Yeah, so Lena Dunham's first big projects were a film called Tiny Furniture and then HBO's Girls. And she was very young when she did both of those. And there was immediately, and she was starring in both of them as well as creating them. Yeah. And there was this enormous sort of surge of like, okay, who is Lena Dunham? What is the deal? What does she represent about a particular generation of people, people who live in a certain place, Williamsburg? What does young coolness look like? Is it this? Do we find this disgusting? Do we find this aspirational? And her work, particularly Girls, was perpetually stuck in this loop of like, she is Hannah Horvath on the show. How much of Lena is Hannah Horvath? How much of Hannah is like an exaggeration? What parts of this are fictional? And that became both the thing everyone loved about that series, one of the things everyone loved about that series, and one of the major points of detraction for it, because every time somebody was criticizing the show, it was like they were also criticizing her, or every criticism of her became a criticism of the show. It became impossible to disentangle them. And, you know, Girls has been, as you said, off the air for 8 years, and Dunham has really deliberately taken a step back from the kinds of autobiographical production.
Yeah.
But Too Much now is really diving fully back into that space.
I'm really interested in that idea of like Lena Dunham herself becoming like a referendum on what it means to sort of like be an autobiographical show creator or just like artist in general. I'm going to want to come back to that in just a moment. But maybe, Hanna, you could just set up a little bit of the plot that we're dealing with here when it comes to Too Much. Because like, where do we meet Megan Stalter's character? And also, we should say, Lena Dunham herself plays Jess's sister in the show. And it's kind of nice to have like Lena Dunham talking to the Lena Dunham, allegory kind of character. But do you want to just set up like the general plot of this season?
Yeah, so Jessica has gone through a breakup with someone she was with 8 years. She's working at a video production kind of advertising agency. She wants to be a director, but she's kind of never stepped up to that role. And her brother-in-law, who happens to be her boss, Nepo baby, says, why don't you go to London for like 3 months and do a commercial? So she's like, right, I'm getting out of Dodge. Let's go. And then, like, her first night out, she meets Felix, this very handsome, very jaded sort of musician. And they kind of embark on a kind of messy romance. And as she's trying to kind of find her feet in London, but she's also processing that breakup. And I think in many ways that, you know, Lena's very good at understanding the kind of romantic entanglements and the stress of modern dating, how often you might jump into a new relationship to try and use it as an antidepressant to get over a like last one. And so it's interesting the way over 10 episodes, you know, we see her past seeping in and the baggage that she's bringing, but then also Felix's baggage that he's got going on. So, yeah, so I think what I will say this, Lena, she's very good on that part. I think there's so much about this show that really relates to, you know, too much. I mean, you know, there's a kind of a line in it. It's really the kind of idea where, you know, strong women, because they don't conform to this very easy breezy expectation of what partners women should be in relationships, in life. You know, she really gets that, and what, you know, it's quite nonconformist attitude to it. But it's this. I'm torn on this. She did an interview at Tribeca Film Festival, and she said, and Lena Dunham said, "I've wanted to make a romantic comedy about what happens when a loud, messy, complicated Duet descends on a city of deeply repressed people. What will occur?" And I take umbrage with the city of deeply repressed people. And this is the key flaw in this show, is that, you know, we heard in that clip the reference to Bridget Jones. And the idea, her idea of vision of London is so in the past, so archaic. It's the London that's basically someone who's been raised on Merchant Ivory films and rom-coms from Working Title, who also produced this show. And they're showing a very, very small niche subsection of London that you only ever see in these kind of shows. You know, Notting Hill, one of the big things about that is that, yeah, it's Notting Hill, but it shows none of the actual real Notting Hill. I used to live in Notting Hill. I used to live on that road that he lives on. And it's like, that's not reality. This is like the upper middle class kind of very privileged, very white privileged areas. And I think this is what this show falls into trap on. This is not a real portrait of London at all. It's just a romanticized sort of image of movie London, who hasn't moved on from that, who's taken that verbatim, you know?
But like what I like about that, Hannah, is that like this is sort of like almost like a word for word what people said about girls, right? Which is to say that like Lena seems to traffic in a certain circle, and she doesn't really seem that interested, Kathryn, in being like, I want to represent the world outside that circle. I think she's like very good, almost like she's like a pointillist artist when it comes to sort of like drawing this particular circle and saying like rendering it with pretty, you know, stark precision, but then saying everything outside of that, not only do I not understand it, it maybe is not for me to render. So like, which is to say like, here's a relatively flat version of London, this idea of like repressed London that is like, maybe exists in this like upper class, you know, version of London. Same thing happened with Brooklyn, which is to say like when people watch Girls, they were like, that's not the New York that I think about. And she's like, that's the New York that I kind of inhabit. And I'm interested in that because Lena gets this pressure, right, Kathryn, as sort of being like a referendum on, you know, on this generation, on millennials and their ability to like see the world. But she actually like really inhabits a very specific slice of it. How much pressure does she deal with in terms of like trying to represent a wider version of the world that she exists in?
She deals with a lot, but she also invites a lot. And so it is always hard to, that is another, like one of the most fascinating things about her as a creator is trying to figure out which of these things she is doing purposefully and like what she is actually saying, like, this is the statement that this is a thesis statement that I am offering to you. And which one of them are like, I don't know, like, we're just out here, it's a comedy, you know? and which
Yes.
one is me and which one is this character. And one of the differences with girls was that she had 4 central female characters, and there was a podcast recently where she said that she's not really a Hanna, she's more of a Shosh, and like I think probably there could be a bunch of think pieces on that one line alone.
100%.
But by the nature of having these 4 central characters, it was more deliberately like, it's not just me, it's not just this specific world that I'm living in. It's like, here's a broader spectrum. It's Sex and the City, it's Friends, it's still in this very niche and privileged and bubble-like space, but it's like, here's a couple different versions of it. Too Much is like, here's a main character. She's playing basically me. And so it is a much narrower, I think, invitation for that kind of like, what does a generation mean speculation.
Well, let's in that spirit, let's talk about the performances here, because the main performance is, of course, Megan Stelter, who's having a banner couple of years because of Hacks, but also specifically when you think about this performance, Hanna, I think it's like kind of interesting to think about this as a lot of people kind of describe it like that's the closest that Lena Dunham could have come to just like casting herself in this particular role. What strikes you about Megan Stelter's performance in the show?
You know what? I really don't like. I mean, I know she's cast as a character that's supposed to be Lena Dunham, but Meg, she's like such her own person. I think she just has this very playful kind of eccentricity, and her line delivery on some things that feels so specifically her. There's very much like Kayla from Hacks in this performance as Jessica, which I love. I will watch anything that Meg Stelter's in. I think she's fantastic, but she's also showed in this, I think she did in Hacks a bit, but she does show, I don't know, the vulnerability and the kind of darkness a little bit more even though some things where I feel like some of the too much bits are like, is it that we're repressed, or did you just say all men are rapists to around random people that no one knows? And that's suddenly like, oh, I'm too much. Like, no, that's just rein it in.
But it sounds like you actually like don't like the comparison, like the idea that like she's doing too much like Lena. Like you're like, this is a different thing.
Yeah, because I understand it. I understand what people are saying, but she has her own personality and certain quirks that make her it feels like she's just doing another Meg Stelter performance than doing a version of Lena.
When you think about the show, Kathryn, I think like there's something interesting about Girls in that, there's that episode where I think it's the first episode where it ends with Hanna Horvath saying, I want to be the voice of a generation, or at least a voice of a generation. And there's like something searching about Girls that kind of casts it in this like auteur universe, that casts it in this like speaking on behalf of certain people kind of place. I'm not sure that Too Much has the same ambitions. I've watched the first couple of episodes so far, but do you think the show is going to have the same kind of cultural, footprint as Girls did?
I think it's very likely that we'll all be talking about Too Much for the next week or two. And we just are not in there are so many reasons why I think it won't. But one of the biggest is simply that it is a Netflix show, which means all of it will come out. We will all watch it. We will all have the conversations we're going to have about it, but those conversations will be brief. And even if it does become like an enormous, let's say it became a Squid Game sized cultural event,
Unlikely,
or Baby
but
Reindeer.
Yes. Yeah.
Even then, we would not see more of this show for like 2 years, probably. That's just not the Netflix model of it. And the reality of Girls was like every fall it was there, and I have increasingly come to believe that that is the kind of thing that is necessary for that level of immersion. I believe there's a reason why everyone is talking about Love Island USA right now, even though it is not good this season. Like we crave that kind of return again and again, and the model for a show like this just doesn't allow for that.
I think between a new Lena Dunham show and also like yesterday, Lindy West announced a new memoir, and it just kind of feels like a very specific slice of the internet that sort of like used to capture more attention has maybe like has a little bit less space this time around. Am I right in that read, Kathryn?
I think so. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, this is the unfortunate and beautiful reality of millennials
Yeah.
also, which is like I'm a millennial and I just turned 40. And
Mm.
guess what? There's a new generation of younger people. There are Gen Z comedies, like major Gen Z comedies
Yeah.
this year, which is I think relatively new. So it makes sense that they're taking up less space. Guess what? There are new adults now.
Kathryn, you're making me confront my own mortality. For that reason, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you to both of you for being here. I really appreciate your time. You guys are the best. Thanks again.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Kathryn Arendonk is a culture critic for New York Magazine's Vulture. Hanna Flint is a freelance TV and movie critic. She's in London, England. Too Much is streaming now on Netflix. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, so Prada's summer season is maybe not off to the best start. At a fashion show in Milan, Prada models wore the sandals that looked a lot like traditional Indian Kolhapuri sandals, and they didn't acknowledge the origins of the sandals. There was a big backlash online, and then Prada ended up admitting, maybe we should have been upfront about the inspiration. But the thing is, Prada's sandals scandal is kind of part of a long history of South Asian fashion being appropriated by the West. So we're going to talk about that. Joyita Sengupta is here. Joyita, what's up, pal? How's it going?
Going great. How are you?
I'm glad that you're here from your sneaker room. What a view! Absolutely incredible. Talk to me about the sandals. What do they look like? Want to describe them?
Sure. They're basically like flat leather sandals. There's like a thick band that goes across the top, or like across your foot, and then there's like a long, thin strap that like goes down the length of your foot, and then it forms into a toe ring that secures your big toe to the foot. It's usually very ornate. Sometimes that little thin strap can be braided. There's usually a lot of design sort of built into just the leather. It's definitely not minimalist by any means.
And then when you see that the sandals that the Prada models are wearing, like how similar do they look in terms of that description?
I mean, in the great words of Pam from The Office, it's the same picture. So
you're like,
it's the exact same.
That is exactly what that is.
Yeah, like they didn't alter it at all. And they look great. They're beautiful sandals.
Yeah, and you go, these are great sandals. Perhaps you should acknowledge where they came from. I want to get to that for a moment, but Prada is not maybe certainly not the first fashion brand to be called out for culturally appropriating South Asian fashion. What are some of the other sort of big examples you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a bunch recently, like just earlier this like spring summer season, Reformation released this set where it's like basically like a tank top style top, and then like a skirt, and then like a scarf. And I don't know, I don't want to be crazy here, but it feels like I'm looking at a langa. Like I'm looking at like a minimalist early 2000s.
Like, don't tell me I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. Yeah, okay. All right,
yeah, like don't, like, and this is something that's also part of sort of a greater trend. Like I think we're seeing a resurgence of interest from like the Western world and South Asian fashion, or at least inspiration from South Asian fashion right now. We saw something similar in the early 2000s. So it kind of makes sense that we're seeing that now. But when you see fashion TikTokers calling something a Scandinavian scarf, when it's a long scarf worn with evening wear, and it's an elegant European style, it's rightfully pissing a lot of South Asians off when they're like, that's a dupatta. Like, just call it what it is.
Yeah, it's okay for you to sort of like acknowledge the origin points of this.
Exactly.
So, some of the headlines that I've seen around these stories have used like strong language. Like I've seen like a headline describing it as cultural theft. I'm curious if like that feels accurate to you in terms of like describing this, and also if so, why does it matter to sort of use that strong language to point this out?
Yeah, I mean, to use another strong word, it is colonial in its nature. And the reason it's, I think, resonating with a lot of people, there's multiple sort of layers to this. I think at the very face value, for a lot of South Asians, particularly in the West, who've experienced some level of like discrimination or xenophobia, that have felt like uncomfortable wearing their own cultural clothing out in non-cultural spaces, or like say you're like running into the store on the way to like the temple or the mosque, feeling like those eyes on you, and then seeing non-South Asian people particularly white Westerners not experience that, that stings. And then there's a deeper history here as to why I call this a colonial thing. Like, okay, perfect example. Why do we call the Paisley pattern the Paisley pattern? Why is it named after a place in Scotland and not where the pattern originates from, which was originally like Iran, like it's a Persian design that was then taken to India during the Mughal era. And what happened is that British colonizers developed a taste for Kashmiri shawls and said, wow, this makes us look worldly and makes us look fancy, but let's just make it in the UK, which was the UK then, and Scotland, and call it Paisley, and then have production in Paisley, Scotland, rather than give credit to the people who make it, and the folks that they were colonizing at the time. And there's countless examples like this in terms of actual theft, like diamonds, jewelry, to, you know, things like that, where it's like the design is sort of taken and it's put on a pedestal, but the people themselves are oppressed and at the time starved. You know, there's a lot of painful history here, and that's why it is really that deep.
Yeah, I think there's a maybe a tendency to sort of like in these moments call these things neutral, like to sort of like look at this and say, well, why is that a big story? These models are just wearing these sandals. What, you know, what's the larger, deeper story here? And what you're giving is this history of saying, when you take from a culture, but particular culture that was dominated as these things were taken from them, that means something, right? That means something because like these symbols are contextualized in the place where they are, and then they're decontextualized somewhere else, and they're robbed of their actual cultural meaning in that way. And that's not a small thing at all. Prada acknowledged that they could have been more clear about the inspiration for the sandals, and have said that they will be, quote, opening a dialogue for a meaningful exchange with local Indian artisan communities. When you hear that statement, what do you make of that statement? I mean, your face tells me a little bit of what you make of that statement, but I want to hear your words about what you make of that statement.
Prada is one of the best known, one of the largest fashion houses in the world. And this isn't their first time wading into controversy. So, I mean, briefly, they had a blackface scandal, like in 2018, and then they essentially said that they were going to hire more diverse people at their company. That's not being reflected by their practices, because if you're going to acknowledge the craftspeople of India, specifically of Kolhapur, which is a city in a state of Maharashtra in India, you could have done that when the sandals were being made. And I think if they did actually employ South Asian craftspeople to make them, they would have said that in their statement. And it falls flat, particularly when there's examples like other European designers like Dries Van Noten, who famously worked really closely with South Asian handicrafts. And because of the rise of like fast fashion, a lot of these, you know, there's villages in India that are like essentially losing their livelihoods because people are buying less of these things. And Dries Van Noten, great European designer who actually acknowledged that, would not just take inspiration, but would actually like bring the capital back into those communities. So I think for Prada to say that in 2025, it's like you had all the options, you know, in front of you, you didn't take them.
I think the idea of like having a specific designer who's saying like this is a different path that you could have taken, a good rooted example in saying, hey, this is what it looks like to succeed at this. With just like
one of your peers.
Yeah, exactly. So with maybe like a minute that we have left here, there are things that fashion brands should be doing. You kind of pointed at one of them. For us as consumers looking at this, what's your advice for us? How should we think about these moments and these stories in terms of our engagement with these brands?
I think it's like naming things what they are. Like don't call them toe ring sandals. They're Kolhapuri chappals or Kolhapuri sandals. Like in terms of like the long scarf trend that I was talking about earlier, like I've seen, because this became a huge discussion on social media, particularly on TikTok. Just the other day, I saw a TikTok of, you know, like a white girl sort of talking about an outfit that she was planning for an event. And she kind of like just nonchalantly called the scarf around her neck. She was like, yeah, and I think I'm going to put a dupatta with this dress. Just calling it what it is. And it's not like she like made it this whole discussion. She was just like, it is what it is. I think that goes a very long way.
To use the correct name, right? Like that's
exactly.
Yeah.
I think acknowledging the origins of these things, it goes a long way. Like, what if we never learned the term paisley and we just called it a Kashmiri?
I didn't know that. That was new to me. I was
yeah.
like taking it in. I was like, oh wow, I have a lot of paisley shirts.
Yeah, like what I call it that too.
Yeah.
Like there's that. And then there's also like, I don't know, like if Prada ends up releasing these sandals, I'm pretty sure they're going to be in the ballpark of 1,000 Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
Go get an Indian pair. There's a lot of brands you can get them from, including Soul Sisters.
Joyita,
SOLE.
I got to leave it there, but I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much, friend. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Joyita Sengupta is a producer at CBC News. She was in Toronto. I'm Elamin. This is Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. Love to see you then.